and Laura will agree with this. He's Deputy US Editor, and he heavily edited and rewrote the copy. He made a lot of the copy that was incomprehensible because of the technical nature of the story, and made it comprehensible. A whole host of others here, James Paul, Spencer Ackerman, another colleague who was in Hong Kong with us but is never mentioned, Guardian colleague David Blishen. And I could go on, but I won't. There's a real contrast between the way the reaction in Britain and the reaction in the US. Britain tends to pride itself on being the land of free speech and freedom of the press. We talk about Magna Carta, and Mother of Parliament, and the fight for free press in the 18th and 19th century. And yet when a story like Snowden comes along, you realise how superficial all this is. And The Guardian over the last 8 to 9 months has seen the ugly side of the British establishment. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Guardian editor, Alan Rusbridger, who's over in the middle of the room, who was under enormous pressure, especially last autumn, being threatened with all kinds of things. But he withstood that pressure, and he sort of skillfully negotiated the Guardian's way through this morass to allow us to keep reporting. And part of the reason, a lot of people don't realise that we don't have the documents in Britain, we don't even have them in the New York office anymore. We've become dependent on collaboration with the American press to keep reporting this story. And so I'd like, on behalf of the Guardian, to give thanks to the New York Times, who've been extremely generous. The Constitution in America, I know American journalists are under pressure, but the Constitution at least gives you some safeguards that we don't have in Britain. And the final point, I'm so proud to be on this platform with Laura and Len. When we went to Hong Kong first 24 hours, we were all slightly suspicious of one another. Different talents, different backgrounds, but we blended into a team very quickly, and we've become good friends, and I'm sure we'll stay friends for the rest of our days. And I didn't meet Bart Gellman until this morning, but his reporting in the Washington Post has been brilliant, and just contributed so much to the Snowden story. And the final is thanks to Ed Snowden for his courage. Over this weekend, I'll probably have drinks with Glenn and Laura, but I'm sorry that Ed Snowden won't be there to have a drink with us, but I hope America will put that right soon.
That was so bad, yeah. I understood almost every other word. I want to thank the Polk Committee and Long Island University, and by amazing coincidence, the quill pen and the logo is my new preferred method of writing and editing. This has been an extraordinary story, far more difficult and perhaps consequential than anything I've done before, and this is not something that any of us came into or undertook alone. I came back to the Washington Post having left there 3 years earlier to a new executive editor I have not met and who didn't know me from Adam, and had a fairly improbable story to offer and a great big pile of risks. And Marty Barron embraced that story in the very best tradition of guts and judgment and accountability at the Washington Post. I'm going to be forever grateful for that. I'm enormously proud of the work that we all did together with a core group of reporters and editors and designers and researchers with decades of collective experience among us. I have to single out just a few who would include Greg Miller, Ellen Nagashima, Carol Lenning, who's here in the room, editors Jason Huckman and Peter Finn and Ann Kornblut, and also my partner on some of the most recent stories, Ashkan Soltani, who helped me understand enormously complex and difficult material. At a personal level, I lean most heavily, as always, on the love and support and advice of Daphne Linzer, for whom I'll be forever grateful. And I have to close with a word about Ed Snowden. What we've learned above all in these last 9 months is that big, important decisions were being made for us and surveillance conducted against us in secret. And the transparency that Ed Snowden made possible has allowed us collectively, through the normal checking forces of civil society and politics and the law and the marketplace, to decide for ourselves where we want to draw those lines. Thank you.
So I'm really incredibly honored to be here and thankful to the Polk committee for giving me a really good excuse to come home. This is the first time I've been home since I ordered a plane with Glenn and Ewen to go to Hong Kong. And so it's really spectacular to be here, and it's also quite disorienting. Last May, the field, what we looked at was a lot of uncertainty, risk, concern for everyone. And so it's really extraordinary to be here and receive this award, but I think that it's important also that we remember that when we actually do this reporting, the enormous risks that journalists take on, and especially that sources take on. And in the case of Snowden, putting his life on the line literally to share this information to the public, not just the American public, but to the public internationally. And I want to say something about working with Glenn and Ewen. You don't really know how people will respond to risk until you're confronted with it. You hope that you'll stand up and that you'll have each other's back, and that those will be the people who will protect you and get you home safely. And I just want to say that this award would not be possible without their courage and bravery and fierce reporting every step of the way. And we were, as Ewen said, untested, working together. We each had our areas of expertise, but we got on the plane, had never worked together, and did something and worked together in a way that was really extraordinary, and I'll forever be bound to them. None of us would be here, Bart, Ewen, Glenn, the Washington Post, the Guardian, New York Times, all the people who are being offered these awards without the fact that someone decided to sacrifice their life to make this information available. He's not the first person who sacrificed their life, but he came forward with information that allows us to know what's actually happening. And so this award is really for Edward Snowden.
First of all, thank you so much to the Polk Committee and Long Island University for this award. The reporting that we've done has received a lot of support and a lot of praise and the like, but it's also received some very intense criticism, primarily in the United States and the UK. And so to be honored and recognized by our journalistic colleagues this way, speaking for myself at least, means a great deal. Also really honored to be able to share the award with the people that I call my journalistic colleagues who are on stage here with me, the people that James Clapper calls accomplices. It really is true that the story could not have been told without numerous people committed to telling it, involved every step of the way. And I'm finally really happy to see a table full of Guardian editors and journalists whose role in the story was much more integral than the publicity generally recognizes. I think it's easy to look back now and think this is so obviously such an incredibly important journalistic story, and to think that any editor or newspaper would simply dive right in and want to aggressively tell the story, but it really wasn't true. Back in those early days of Hong Kong, there were all kinds of very grave question marks hanging over the source, the material, the legal liability, the political reaction. And I'm so happy that I was part of an institution at The Guardian staffed with incredibly intrepid editors and reporters. Ewen named a few of them, many of them, but certainly leading the list is Janine Gibson and Stuart Miller and Alan Rusbridger, who really never flinched in not only allowing us, but pushing us and encouraging us to pursue the story as fearlessly and aggressively as possible. And I really believe that the reporting could not have happened the way that at least I thought that it should happen had it not been for The Guardian. So I certainly consider them an integral part of this award. Just one final point, which is that when we were in Hong Kong, we actually spent, obviously, a great deal of time talking about surveillance policies and the documents and the like, but we also spent at least as much time, if not more so, talking about issues of media and journalism. And in part that was because we knew that how the media treated the story would be a major part of what the impact was. In part we knew that it was because the debate that we hoped to trigger was not just one about surveillance, but about the proper role of journalism and the relationship between the media and the government or other factions that wield great power. But we also knew that we were doing this reporting in the context of what already was some pretty grave threats to the news gathering process in terms of the unprecedented attacks on whistleblowers by the Obama administration, as well as the controversy that had happened literally weeks before we began publishing, which was the trolling through AP and emails and phone records of AP reporters and editors, and then formally declaring James Rosen of Fox News a, quote, co-conspirator for having done what journalists do every single day, which is work with their source to gather information that the public should know. And I think it's important to recognize how intensified those threats became over the last 9 or 10 months. There are ways to intimidate journalists. You can imprison them en masse, but there are other ways to do it. And calling journalists working on stories accomplices, or having powerful chairmen of committees specifically accuse journalists of being criminals and advocating for the prosecution, or having major media figures openly debate whether we ought to be prosecuted, is a way to intensify that climate of fear, as is detaining my partner or marching into the Guardian's newsroom and forcing them to destroy those laptops. And I think ultimately the only way to deal with those kind of threats is to just do the reporting as aggressively, if not more so, than you would have absent those threats. And I feel like all of the journalists involved in this story have done that, and I'm really proud to have worked with so many who did. And then finally, you know, I think journalism in general is impossible without brave sources. I know our journalism in particular would have been impossible without the incredible courage of Edward Snowden. And it's really remarkable that the reporting that we've done has won all sorts of awards, not just in the United States, but around the world. And he has received immense support, incredible amounts of praise from countries all over the world, and all sorts of awards. And the fact that for the act of bringing to the world's attention this system of mass surveillance that had been constructed in the dark, he's now threatened with literally decades in prison, probably the rest of his life, as a result of what the United States government is doing, I think is really odious and unacceptable. And I hope that as journalists we realize how important it is not only to defend our own rights, but also those of our sources like Edward Snowden. And I think each one of these awards just provides further vindication that what he did in coming forward was absolutely the right thing to do and merits gratitude and not indictments and decades in prison. Thanks very much.
For the working press, or those among them who are actually working, there will be a press conference afterward by our 4 winners of this category. Thank you all for coming. Good luck.